This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Powers, principalities, thrones, and dominions. What do we make of the New Testament terms of the denizens of the spirit realm? Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert, once again joining us for our monthly Iron and Myth series as we try to tackle some of these strange and unusual questions by peering into that room that is dimly lit and while holding a mirror through a glass darkly, is Pastor Doug Van Dorn, author of Giants, Sons of the Gods, the 10th Anniversary Revised and Expanded Edition. Now out, Brian Godawa, best-selling author, award-winning screenwriter, author of the Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse series, as well as nonfiction books that delve into the theology behind his fiction, and the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, Dr. Judd Burton. After our last conversation, the word saints occurred to me. This is one that I think most of us assume we know what it means. Different meanings in different contexts, of course. If you're a Roman Catholic, of course, it has a different meaning. But in the Bible, I've always thought that the word saint applied to a righteous or holy human until a few months ago when Sharon and I were taking a look at the book of Daniel. And we noticed that there's a reference to the Kedeshim in Daniel chapter 4 that is used in parallel with the group that we discussed last month, the Watchers. So the Watchers, the Irene, are kind of referred to in Daniel 4 because of the parallel verses as the Holy Ones. But in Daniel chapter 7, that word is translated as saints. Daniel 7 is the prophecy of the little horn who a lot of end times scholars or students will look at it and interpret the little horn as the Antichrist figure. And beginning in verse 21, as I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. But that word is Kedeshim. It's the same thing that was used of the Watchers back in Daniel chapter 4. So this really intrigues me because that again, in verse 27, you get another reference here that maybe there's more going on here in end times prophecy if we interpret Daniel 7 as a prophecy of the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, the people of the Kedeshim. So if this is used in Daniel chapter 4 to refer to the Watchers who decreed the punishment of Nebuchadnezzar, when we get to chapter 7, are we looking at a prophecy of a war, an end times war against, in the heavenlies, and then judgment given for the holy ones, the saints of the Most High? And like as a follow-up question, what does this suggest about our interpretation of words translated saints in the New Testament? Who wants to be brave and jump out on that one?
I remember preaching through Daniel a couple years ago, and one of the commentaries I used was the Hermeneia commentary from J.J. Collins. And Collins is I think he's a Roman Catholic. His wife, Adela, did her dissertation on something in Revelation. I think the sea monster or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but that was kind of the first time that I came across the same idea, Derek, and he takes that view. In fact, he translates it exactly the way that you do, the people of the holy ones of the Most High. And he points out right there in that comment on Daniel 7:27, the divine counsel from Deuteronomy 32:8. So he just straight up brings it up, and then he mentions how in Daniel 10 through 12 there are angelic princes. And given the fact that the earlier part of Daniel 7 is talking about certainly a divine council meeting room where the one like the Son of Man comes to the Ancient of Days, and there's another one of these terms that's in this chapter as well, right there. The thrones were set up, and a lot of people think that the thrones that Paul talks about, I think only maybe one time in one of his epistles, that he's getting that from this chapter. So that the thrones there are the sons of God, the ruling princes over the nations. And Collins takes this view. He was one of the few that I found that did, that the holy ones here is a reference to the angelic beings. And I think that given the context, that to me, that made the most sense when I preached through it. But yeah, it's definitely taking a different approach to it than most of the English translations, isn't it? Which just says the saints of the Most High.
Yeah, it gives a kind of a different connotation there. Not only the fact that this little horn is prevailing over these saints. I mean, again, you can. I've heard it preached or taught that this is the oppression or the great tribulation that takes place during that final period of history. But if that word means what we think it means, it seems like it's describing war in the heavenlies instead. And then the heavenly court sitting and passing judgment given for the holy ones, the Kedoshim.
Yeah, I do have a different view on this because as I looked into that actually more recently, I think that this is one of those words or concepts that we have where it's a phrase that's used both of heavenly beings and of God's people. So, for instance, in fact, it all starts with God. God is the Holy One, right? And so his people are called in multiple places, clearly the people of the land, his holy ones. And then, yeah, I would say that, Daniel 4, holy ones of watchers, in the same way that sons of God begins as a, watcher term, but we are sons of God. And that's the point, is we are to become those, as the Eastern Orthodox might say, divinized. So I think it's in that playing field. And the reason why I don't think it can be taken as watchers in Daniel 7 is because Daniel 7 is, however you interpret Revelation, and we all know that I have the very unique version of Revelation here. But seriously, however you interpret it, the connection is very, very one-to-one with the passages. And when it talks about the saints in Revelation, it does clearly denote them as those who did not take the mark, those who worship Jesus Christ. They're not watchers. And those saints, where the saints were in, I think it's Revelation 18, where Jerusalem, where the saints were martyred, etc. So the holy ones in Revelation are the Christians, are the believers. And that matches this passage here, warring with the saints, etc. So that to me seems, the context of that and the connections seem that while I agree that the holy ones is used of watchers, I don't think it's referenced it here. And as for the verse in 27, shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. That's one of those tricky. Is this one in Aramaic? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the tricky grammar passages where it could very well be relating to it's just simply a descriptive, the people who are the saints of the Most High, that kind of thing. So, or if you want to see it as, okay, the people of the holy ones of the Most High, sure, maybe that one verse might be referring to watchers. I'll take that for sure. But the other ones where it's talking about the warring with the saints and stuff, I see the connection with Revelation is too solid for me to take on that watcher definition, at least in this chapter. Again, obviously context is what affects it, but
I think that one of the interesting takeaways from looking at these passages is that it interspersed in throughout all of this angelic demography, angelic taxonomy, is that believers are included in this, and that is I'm sure that our experiences are probably similar when we all came across this, is that it's just sort of, it's paradigm shattering in the best sort of way, and it puts it's not something that can just be boiled down to the appreciative aspects of biblical literacy, but what what it does in terms of not just the culture of the church, but the culture of God's, kingdom. And I think that it's a timely thing to push to the foreground. If we're to look at this and sort of Great Commission terms, I think it's something that needs to be included in the apologetic stratagem that we have these days. Not just apologetics, but also just ministerial. And I know that each of us can speak to those things and from our own different experiences, but to me, that's one of the exciting things and compelling things that keeps me coming back to examining, this ever developing angelic taxonomy.
Yeah. And I would just wanted to add that, again, I even affirm the fact that I think the context is definitely both and the very picture of the heavenlies connected with the earthly realities, I'm totally on board with. I fully agree with that. And I do agree with you, Judd, that big picture is definitely the thing that changes the understanding of the context for sure, and gives us a more wide open understanding of what's being talked about here for sure. So definitely both and in that sense.
Yeah, I took the both and as well. It's really a double entendre. And the reason why, I think, Brian, you brought up the sons of God. And I don't remember if we've really talked about this a whole lot, but this whole idea that they receive their kingdoms, in the Old Testament as their inheritance, but the promise of the new covenant is that God's people will receive those kingdoms. So we take over as the sons of God as they're disinherited, sort of. And I think that the word saint is doing that very thing by the time we get even to the New Testament epistles. When Paul's writing to the saints, my view would be that those are very much human beings there. And the reason why he's able to call them that is because we are now taking over for what the sons of God were in the Old Covenant.
That was probably one of the more, shocking, controversial ideas when I read Unseen Realm. When I first read through Heiser's, the narrative, and then understood, where was it all ending and leading, and it was like, and that word, we are sons of God, it always bothered me. What does that mean? And to realize that, oh my gosh, yeah, we are to become those very sons of God of the divine heavenly council. It was like, it was really shocking to me to embrace. But like I said, it finally does fit in with that so-called divinization, of the glorification of the believers, et cetera. And so yeah, that was really, and that was also, as an evangelical, that was one of the scarier things to talk about with Christians, because it would freak them out, but I think it's definitely a game changer.
There's this verse, Daniel 12:3, I think, that kind of hits on it. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Yeah. And that's exactly what we're talking about, and that's kind of the conclusion of the way, that the book of Daniel ends. So
mm-hmm.
It's kind of like what Jesus was confronted by it was the scribes and Pharisees, or whoever, the Pharisees and Sadducees, because they don't believe in resurrection, and they were trying to trick Jesus into making some sort of misstep that they could hang him with, and he made reference to those who are found worthy to attain to the resurrection, and will be like the angels in heaven, neither marrying nor giving in marriage. And that's Matthew. What is that? Matthew 12. I would have to go back and look it up. Anyway, it's where it's often used as a proof text to say that the whole Genesis 6 paradigm is out of whack, because the angels neither marry nor give in marriage, but it says the angels in heaven neither marry nor give in marriage. But those who attain to the resurrection will be like them, because this is all about being resurrected, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, in incorruptible bodies. And whatever that looks like, presumably it's going to be a whole lot better than what we got right now. Anyway, yeah, I wanted to get into the New Testament terminology for the denizens of the spirit realm, but this one kind of, I'd made a note to try to talk about this last month, and we didn't get there, and especially in that Daniel 7 context. And I think that the reference there for judgment given for the saints of the Most High is really interesting. That there's it appears to be some sort of supernatural war, spiritual war, and then the divine council rules on behalf of the saints of the Most High, the holy ones of the Most High. And that, I think that's just really like, wow, there's more going on in this Bible than than I realized. Powers, principalities, thrones, dominions. That was used as a title of an episode of the television series Millennium back around 1998 or something. And at the time I thought, wow, that's really cool. Not realizing, back then, 25 years ago, that those are actually terms translated from the Greek in the New Testament, used in the epistles to refer to denizens of the spirit realm, rulers, principalities, powers. In the Greek, rulers and principalities, we find in the term archai, archon, used to denote rulers. That's probably the one that is most often used. Archon and archanta, other variants thereof. But we also see things like, dominions, elemental spirits, authorities, cosmocrators, which gets used once in Ephesians 6:12, cosmic rulers, world rulers, cosmic powers. Just to throw this question out, Judd, I'll put you in the first. Are these, like we discussed with terms in the Old Testament last month, are these different ranks or different, ontologically different beings?
Well, that is an excellent question. Of course, these were words that the writers of the New Testament are using, or that they're obviously using it from the Greek repertoire. And to my mind, and I had to pull out what few Greek references I have on hand. So much of my stuff is in storage right now. But it seems to me that they deal more, the way that they're being applied by New Testament authors, in particular Paul, seem to have more to do about rank than they do in anything else. I think probably one of the words that we need to include, just sort of outside the realm of that grouping of words, is also the analog for the accuser. If we're talking about the angelic orders, the analog for the word that's used as the analog for accuser in the New Testament, diabolos, which is something that we can circle back to. But that I'll set the tone for everything with that particular concession.
Yeah, I mean, I think Doug talked about this last time, which I think was important. The transition between the Old Testament, New Testament, and intertestamental literature, and how what we see as well as first century Jews, sort of with their anti-Christian translation of the Masoretic text, right, in several points, the desire to sort of get rid of the deity elements, the plurality of deity, because they were against the Trinity, But Doug had mentioned how the word Elohim and gods, through the Greek process, Hellenization, and for whatever reason in the New Testament, it just became sort of angel became the general term encompassing all of that, which is unfortunate, because there seems more of a specific taxonomy. Malachim, right? We talked about this, the last time. Malachim could be more functional, but nonetheless, whatever it is, even if it's functional or ontological, it's still one of the lower class statuses of this hierarchy. But there doesn't seem to be that hierarchy in the New Testament. And I've read this, and you guys can, if you know where some verses are about this, but it just seems to me like Paul's done the same thing with whatever, watchers, territorial spirits, or archon, whatever hierarchy they had conceived of. It reads like it's just sort of like all of them, rulers. He's just throwing them all. Look, all the powers and rulers and authorities, everything you can think of. Christ has them under his feet. So it's kind of like, it seems to me like it reads more generically than this distinct watcher paradigm that we see in the Old Testament. It's still referring to those beings, but there just seems to be less of that taxonomy, which, but if anyone knows of literature that analyzes these various terms, I'd love to discover it, because I'm not familiar with anything that proves a specific taxonomy.
Yeah, Ron Johnson did a dissertation. Can't remember what it's called. Let's see. It's a dissertation on the Divine Council, and it's called Old Testament Backgrounds for Paul's Use of Principalities and Powers.
Oh.
So he does do a little bit of work on that. One of the things to me that in thinking about the taxonomy and how this might work in heaven is to understand that Paul will use the same terms for both earthly and heavenly beings. And so, like, you think of Colossians 1:16, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. And then he lists 4 things, right? So here's kind of the throwing him to a stew or something and just seeing what happens. But he talks about, in this one, thrones, dominions, rulers, and authorities. So if you can use the same terminology for heavenly beings and earthly beings, then I think that if you can make sense of what's going on in the earthly realm, then it would make sense that would be a counterpart in the heavenly realm. So, just kind of looking at the way that we use English words, all of these are dealing with some sort of authority, right? Every one of them, but not necessarily the same kind. So you have thrones. Not everybody is sitting on a throne who rules over something. Like,
There's
you
more
can
kings.
have local rulers. You can have governors who are over principalities, or a larger regions or something like that. Herod the Tetrarch, something like that. A Caesar, who's over everything. He'd be like the throne. All the way down to city governors or whatever. And, I think that you see the gods of the nations kind of do that too, right? You've got the 70 that have equivalents in all the nations with the Divine Council, but then you have like patron deities of little cities and stuff like that, all the way down to household gods.
And kings, yeah.
Yeah, so I would think that, if you can make sense of those on an earthly realm, that you can probably make sense of them better on the heavenly realm, so that it's not just a bunch of synonyms that are talking about exactly the same thing. There is some sort of bureaucracy that's going on in heaven that's probably better developed than what I think Judd brought up last time, with kind of just the L at the top and then the princes, and then underneath that you have or it was you, Brian, you're talking about the craftsman deities and the angels below that. So, that's not something very much taxonomy when you look at the Canaanites, but this seems to be a little bit more developed, I think.
So you got a reference to the prince of demons, presumably a reference to Satan. Matthew 9:34, Matthew 12:24. That's that passage I was trying to think of. He casts out demons by the power of Beelzebul, Baal the prince. And the term in Greek is archon, and forgive my pronunciation, I've not studied Greek, archon ton daimonion. So, prince of demons. Satan also called the prince of this world, the prince of the power of the air in Ephesians 2:2. So, a reference there to archon as prince, but archon also used as rulers in 1 Corinthians 2, is it? Where if the rulers of the age had understood what was happening, they would not have crucified Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's a
Archon
plural.
is one of the few of these terms I think that you're actually getting from the Old Testament Septuagint, because it comes up pretty regularly. I don't remember if it comes up in Daniel, but you certainly have it like in Psalm 2. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers, the archons. So it's like, that has to be something different than the kings of the earth, because why would you be that specific and then talk about somebody that's just exactly the same as the kings of the earth? You wouldn't. So I think that Psalm 2 that's one place that the New Testament is getting at least archon from.
It's also used in the Greek version of 1 Enoch 6, used of Shemiyaza. So at least in some of the Second Temple literature, aside from the Septuagint, you got that reference applied to one who was described as a leader, the chief of the Watchers who rebelled in 1 Enoch 6.
Yeah, to me, the unfortunateness is that it, while this is the indication, the New Testament doesn't go into any. We don't know any details. It tells us nothing. You know what I mean? It only tells. So to ask ourselves, if the Bible doesn't reveal, okay, I'm going to go fundamentalist here. If the Bible doesn't reveal more details, is it important for us to speculate on what those are? That's the question, and how far do we go? And I'm not against speculating in general, but just the caution we need to be making, to be going down the pathway that that can go beyond the text. And I've written novels, fiction, where I've done that, under the genre of fiction, but nonetheless, so I'm not against that in principle, which is one of the reasons why, the passages about Satan, the God of this world, that always troubled me. Like, what? And it finally only made sense understanding, the Watcher paradigm and just and realizing in seeing in intertestamental literature where it talks about Samael and he's connected to Satan, and he was the Watcher over Rome. And it's like, that's when it clicked to me. It's like, oh, okay. So if Rome is conquering the world, is controlling the world, and so that's the supreme, whoever is the watcher over that is kind of the supreme guy over the other watchers of the other territories. And I think that's what Paul's indicating is that, he, not that he was the only one, but that he was certainly the high God of that world, because Rome was the one overall, and that made sense in a way of all those passages that had not before, So and there's an actual New Testament text that's indicating that makes sense to me, But beyond that, I don't know. It's hard to draw out what can we draw out to know from that. I'm very, very much in the dark.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, Brian. I think that using the revelation of Scripture as sort of and however deeply we can get at that with all the tools that we have at our disposal, paleography, linguistics, et cetera, I think that's an excellent point. I'm fond of saying that context is theology, and I think that's something that we could all agree on here. We can certainly debate about it, but we can at least agree on that context is theology. I mentioned a word a moment ago, which I think will not only help further illustrate your point, Brian, one that I agree with, by the way, but I think that it will also illustrate this connective tissue that's important to this discussion between the New Testament and the Old Testament. And I mentioned a word a moment ago, diabolos. Diabolos is interesting in and of itself just because of the morphology of the word. This is the word that's used again and again for the devil in the New Testament. Diabolos comes from two words. It's got a prepositional prefix, di, and balo, which means to cast or throw. And so the imagery there is that you're throwing something into or across something, The idiom is one of conversation and debate. In other words, you're casting your words, you're accusing. And so very clearly in the nuance of the Greek word that's being used for the devil here, diabolos, we have literally the accuser. And so that's one, whatever we want to call it, rank or role. We've discussed this before on episodes of Iron and Myth about the Satan, Satan. Is this a singular individual? Is it not? Well, I think this is one of those examples where you've got pretty clear linguistic boundaries that you can't really go past, but help you nonetheless define this connective tissue between the New Testament and the Old Testament. In this case, between words like, in its angelic context, diabolos and Satan in the Old Testament.
Very cool.
It's interesting when you think about some of the names that you come across in intertestamental literature for some of these demons or for Satan, just to think about what they're conveying and what they mean. So Samael was brought up earlier, venom of God. What an interesting name that is. I mean, the serpentine imagery, but also the poison idea. Mastema is one that you come across quite a bit. Hostility or hatred. There's all kinds of these. Just the word Baal or Zeus are just both mean Lord. Lord of what? I mean, what's that conveying? Again, you have some sort of authority going on there. So just to kind of look at what these mean, Rahab, assail or tremble. Mm-hmm. And then, we just talked about the devil, the adversary, Satan, the accuser. What are these teaching us about that side, especially the dark side of that spiritual realm?
Doug, 7 months ago, you mentioned something in passing that I should have known and really blew my mind, because I was aware that the definite article "the" was before the word Satan in the Old Testament, the Satan. I did not know that it was also present in the Greek in the New Testament.
Almost every case. So not every case, but almost every case. Yep. And yet we, for whatever reason, I think it's because we have the Old Testament scholars get it, right? So when they are translating Hasatan, they're translating the Satan. But for whatever reason, that's not making its way into the way that we're translating it in the Greek. You don't have to translate it. As like Mike says, I'm not the Mike when he's talking about this. Only person who's like that is the Donald before he became the president. You don't usually do that if it's a proper name. But what if they're still carrying over the function more even than they are the name in the New Testament? Then
right.
It would be right to translate him as the Satan, even in Revelation and in, I think it's only the Gospels and just a couple times where it's just Satan. So it's very, very interesting to me. I don't really know what to do with that because I have never heard anybody else talk about that.
No, me neither, which is why I was surprised when you said this, like, right, really? Because, I read a lot and I've got pretty good reading comprehension. Why have I never heard of this before? And I started checking. It's like, well, he's right. Okay. Well, that's weird. It also raises the subject because you mentioned the names of a couple of entities who are sometimes identified as the Satan, Mastema, Samael, Belial is another.
Belial, yeah.
So, and we know that there's at least one prayer, I think, that was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls that prays to God for protection against or protection from the Satans, plural.
Plural, that's correct. So I think Samael is the Satan of Satans or something like that in some of the pseudepigrapha.
Yeah. And well, actually, Paul uses Belial in Corinthians.
He does.
Yeah.
Treacherous waters is what Belial means.
And in the Old Testament, though, you often see that as worthless fellows, as B'nai Belial, the sons of Belial.
Yeah.
But it's translated into English as worthless fellows. Okay. But that raises the issue then, that raises another question that maybe we should have addressed last month as well. Is the Satan a class or a job description of a particular type of supernatural entity? I mean, is it ontologically different from Malachim, Seraphim, Cherubim, or could one of them be the Satan? And have they changed names? Are there different entities that have held that role throughout history? And what happened between the Old Testament and the New Testament when he was just sort of in the Old Testament, the prosecuting attorney, and then in the New Testament, Matthew 12, Jesus says, if the Satan cast out demons by his own power, how will his kingdom stand? Suddenly, he's got a kingdom.
It's interesting to me that at least the ones that come to the top of my head as I think about your question are all divine council scenes, all of them. So from Genesis 3, where Satan is, this is clearly a divine council scene, especially if you allow Ezekiel 28 to have any sort of informative power on it with the stones of fire there, or Ezekiel, I think it's 31, with the trees of Eden that are there. And they're on the mountain, and Adam has his seat there on the council, and there's the Satan. The same thing is true in Job 1 and 2, because he's going with the sons of God. So if that's the case, then it doesn't tell you that he has to be one of the sons of God, but somehow, as they're holding court, he's present in that capacity. And so that, to me, lends itself at least to say that the kind of an entity that would be holding that position of accuser on, in the court would probably be one of the sons of God himself. If then you can add the New Testament view back into the Old, and I know that guys like Mike don't like that, but I actually like it quite a bit because I think that the New Testament is the inspired commentary on the Old.
Fair enough.
So I think that when you come to John talking about Satan and the devil and the dragon kind of all at once, and he's definitely using this language that we get for this creature in the garden. He's not using the Nahash straight up, but it's about as close as
ancient serpent. Yeah.
Right. Then I think that you can say that this creature, especially if he is the Prince of Rome, like Brian was just talking about, if we can make that connection with him, Zeus and Baal, all kind of being the same entity, and I know, Derek, you've talked about that quite a bit as well, then that lends itself all the more to me that position is held by someone who's one of the sons of God.
There's one other type of entity that seems to be given special status by Peter and Jude. And let me bring this up in 2 Peter 2, where both Peter and Jude make reference to a I don't even know how to pronounce it, Doxa, D-O-X-A? Doxa.
Doxa would be
Doxa.
glory.
Yep.
Yeah.
2 Peter 2, verse 10, where Peter is condemning those who have sinned, and he mentions, especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority, bold and willful. They do not tremble as they blaspheme the glorious ones. That's how it's translated into English. Whereas angels, though greater in might and power, do not pronounce a blasphemous judgment against them before the Lord. And Jude makes a similar comment in Jude, verse 8. Verse 8. I was right. How about that? One for the layman. Yet in like manner, these people also, relying on their dreams, defile the flesh, reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious ones. And then in verse 9, he contrasts that behavior with an odd story that we only get right here. But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." So that raises a couple of questions. Number one, what are the doxa, the glorious ones? And number two, if he's using the devil in this context here and said Michael did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, is the devil one of the glorious ones?
This passage is, especially in Jude, it has overlap, I think, with the intertestamental book, the Assumption of Moses or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
But it also has overlap with Zechariah chapter 3 or chapter 4, one of those two, where the Satan is accusing Joshua the high priest, and the angel of the Lord says, "The Lord rebuke you."
Yeah, it's 3.
Chapter 3. Yeah. And so because there it's the Satan doing it, whereas here it's the devil, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, we're back to the Satan and the Diabolos and this character that John says is the same entity. So I don't know what you guys think about that. I'm really curious because I know my opinions are that to kind of take John and move him into the Old Testament, but I don't know what you guys think about that move. So I'm curious.
I don't see how you could read John without doing that, really. I think Mike hit on, I haven't read all of it, but I think Mike hit on that, a little bit of that in his book on Revelation and the Old Testament. But there's so much there in terms of symbolism and imagery already that I don't think you can read not just the Revelation of John, but all of his stuff, even the letters, that talk about the Antichrist.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. This is not something, that I've devoted any structured scholarly study to, but it just is one of those things. It's mentioned twice. Jude and Peter are both referencing the same event. It's both in the context of Genesis 6. They're comparing the sin of the sons of God from Genesis 6 to the sin of these people who defile the flesh and presume to blaspheme the glorious ones. But they don't provide, presumably their readers knew who the glorious ones were and why blaspheming them was a bad thing, apparently. But beyond that, I don't know. Is this a class of entity that they were not supposed to? Or is it because if you try to do it, you're inviting supernatural blowback on yourself, which is why Michael said, "The Lord rebuke you."
I think a lot of that would depend on the rank and file of these glorious ones. If there's a proscription against them from some words of blasphemy, to me that says that they're pretty close in the rank and file to the throne of God.
Yeah, just looking at the Faith Life Study Bible, they're taking a stab at it too. Probably refers to high-ranking, powerful beings in the spiritual realm.
Well, and Michael the Archangel, especially we think about how high and powerful he is, and especially if Doug's right, and he might be a reference to Jesus pre-incarnate or whatever. It's like whatever the case, that's like we always see the archangels as being the highest, one of the highest ranks as there is, but even he has a respect. Now, I don't know that necessarily means that being is higher than him, but certainly high enough for Michael to not so quickly or easily dispatch him,
Yeah, angels, though greater in might and power, do not pronounce a blasphemous judgment against them before the Lord.
Yeah.
I think it's just remarkable that you can blaspheme somebody that's not God.
That's a really good point.
That's a word that we think about only in relation to the high God, isn't it? And here we have two books of the New Testament telling us that you can actually blaspheme entities that aren't him.
Well, that's a product of our culture because blasphemy in the Greek means to revile. So, But so yeah, in their context, they would use blasphemy of any, don't you dare blaspheme the governing rulers or whatever. But nowadays, yeah, we tend to use it only in relation to God, that's interesting to see how word usage changes. But it's interesting also that word change or that meaning change makes us misunderstand things.
It does the same way. And I think it's related to the word Elohim, and how Elohim is a word that we can't possibly think of any other Elohim except for the one true God. So I think they're paralleling each other in the way that they've come to be used in the church over the last few centuries. Yeah. And that's probably the single biggest problem in trying to communicate this understanding to other Christians is, especially if they're very, studied in Scripture and very studied in the monotheistic tradition, and they just can't conceive, in fact, when I first heard it myself, I'm like, that sounds like Mormonism. That sounds like Mormonism. Anyone who knows about other belief systems, it just sounds like Mormonism or henotheism or whatever. And you're like, it's really hard until you start examining your own cultural linguistic bias, and you start saying, well, what does the word God mean? What does monotheism, what does that really mean biblically? Because that's a medieval term that comes out in the context of a contrasting with, pagan pantheistic religion or polytheistic religions. And you're like, okay, it makes sense in their context. But what it's created is a sort of a paradigm that excludes the ability to understand this plurality of divinity within the spiritual realm that is hampering so many Christians.
Well, we could keep pulling on threads in this for
let me give
hours,
you, before you close it off here, Derek, let me give you a couple more of these words to think about, because I think these are interesting, because they're a little different kinds of terms than what we've been looking at. The first one is the word spirit. When I did the first edition of Giants, and I came across the Word Biblical Commentary on 1 Peter 3, and he was giving his argument for why the spirits there are the Rephaim. I bought it, didn't think anything else of it, and then I came across Brian's stuff where he's like, no, I think it's the gods of the nations. Well, I had never really thought about the idea that a spirit could be one of them. I always thought it was a disembodied a demon. That leads to the second one, which is that the word demon is actually used often of gods and not just demigods by the Greeks, and sometimes in the Scripture. And so here we have two words that I never would have associated with the gods that are both being used every once in a while of them. And I wanted to get your take on what you think about that.
Their precedent. That's the way that those words were used in Plato. You find references to them in Greek literature, for centuries. Basically, they were used to describe the word that we're talking about here, daimon or daimonion. Were used to describe gods of all rankings. The Olympian class gods, but everything else too, from the demigods and lesser gods down to the chthonic, deities. That label was used, pretty broadly. The ranking depended on context, but that is a fascinating, revelation, so to speak, about that word, because for the longest time, I myself, was taught, trained to think about those words in terms of just demons and not higher order, fallen angelic deities. But here, the context again dictates how that's used. But I was looking at some of that material just earlier today.
So in that sense, Judd, it's sort of the same way the word Elohim was used in the Old Testament period.
Sure.
Depends on context. Rank would depend on context, and so on. It just designates an entity in that unseen realm, the daemon.
Right. But I mean, as I said, clearly, just in terms of historical linguistics, the precedent for its application like that is in the original Greek itself.
I missed it. You popped out there. What did you say in the original? What?
In the original Greek,
Gotcha.
it's being applied. The way that Greek authors would have. The New Testament authors are doing the same kind of thing, but the context dictates what the rank and file would be.
But I think it's important too to point out that there's another case in the New Testament. There's another case of what's the word? Not accommodate, the opposite of accommodate, when you capture, so there's been a capturing of this concept, and Paul clearly uses it in as a negative phrase, like 1 Timothy 4, devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons, whereas the demonia in the Greek would just be, no, it's a spirit entity, but he's using that language, but he also has clearly invested it with his new meaning of negativity that Christians clearly had towards it,
Yeah, whereas the Greeks but really almost every ancient people, they kind of viewed these demons as neutral. They could be good or bad.
Yeah.
The New Testament is kind of the first to see it's exclusively bad.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, in the New Testament, Doug, they don't use the prefixes for a good demon, eudaimon, or a bad demon, kakadaimon, altogether not even utilized in the New Testament.
Yeah, that is really interesting. They just drop the prefixes and it's just demon.
Yeah, and it's bad and it's evil.
Bad. So with the word demon, there's all kinds of different derivations that people have looked into of what this means, and I think this is interesting because Plato takes it from the word daemon, that means knowing. Well, there's this group of people in the Old Testament called the Yidioni.
Yep.
And these are called the knowing ones.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting? And these are definitely non-human dead. And in fact, Brian, I think these creatures can teach. And I would think that would include, Rephaim sort of things, but they're not usually the teachers. The teachers are more the sages, right? These are the Apkallu. These are the watchers that taught people things. And so I actually think that could be one of the instances where demon is not being used necessarily of an evil spirit, but maybe of something higher. You have Homer derives from a word that means divinity. Eusebius takes it from a word that means to fear. And modern dictionaries take it from a word that means to divide destinies. In other words, they control your fate. So this word is packed with all kinds of possibilities in terms of what it communicates to us when you hear a demon.
But it clearly meant something a lot different to the ancient Greeks than to the Jews and the early church.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at Hercules as a good guy versus Hercules as a bad guy, it's going to, right?
Right. Yeah. And that was Homer's description. In fact, as we mentioned on a previous program, the thing that blew my mind, not Homer, but Hesiod, who wrote that the daemons were the spirits of those who lived during the Golden Age when Kronos ruled. The Meropes anthropoi, and scholar Amar Anus brilliantly showed that term Meropes comes from the same Semitic root as Rephaim. So, when they died, these daemons became kindly and helpful and going around and, dispensing gifts to humans. Yeah, as long as you sacrifice to them.
Yeah.
Fascinating, and they're just, again, reinforces the idea that we hope you, viewer or listener at home, are coming away with, that there's a lot more going on inside your Bible than most of us were taught growing up, and it's a lot more interesting. And as a fiction author, Brian, I know you found this. Certainly, my wife has found this too. Is that as an author of fiction, boy, you don't need any bigger palette than what you've got right there in the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, the good thing about fiction is it allows me, I also write theological books, and oftentimes I write them as companions to the novels because I know Christians want to know, where did I get this stuff from? And I would too, right? So I do that, but it's interesting that, the novels afford me the freedom to push the envelope, to speculate, right? Because I'm not saying this is the right way it really is. I don't know, but this is one way of at least telling a story that gets the theological messaging that I deeply believe in, even if I don't, even though the elements are fictional. And I'm not saying this is how it is because we just don't know, right? So that's the benefit of fiction, that it allows you to do that, to explore in a way that I don't in the theological books I write. I try to stick to the text as much as possible. So.
But if we were teaching our kids and our grandkids this stuff this way, as though this was, hey, look, this is like the Lord of the Rings, except it's real. Kids might, I know as a 12-year-old, I would have found church a lot more interesting. Well,
yeah.
Look forward to doing this again next month, fellas. Brian Godawa, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, thanks again, and we'll talk again soon. Check the notes below this program, whether you're watching or listening, and you'll find links to the websites for Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa, and Judd Burton. And join us again next month. We are planning to talk about spiritual geography or sacred geography. In other words, why did things happen in the Bible, where they did, sort of the geography of spiritual warfare, if you will. Coming up, more details on a couple of conferences coming up. And yes, another edition of Bless Their Pointy Little Heads, straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. We've recorded a lot of video over the last 8 years, and we're truly thankful that so many of you have been blessed by our teachings, presentations, our travel-augumentaries of our tours through Israel. But sending videos to other parts of the world can get expensive. So we've now made all of our video content available on demand. Stream our video in full HD with instant access at gilberthouse.org/video. And during the months of May and June, you can save 20% with promo code VIDEO20 at checkout. That's VIDEO20. Video on demand for as little as $3 for 7 days access and 20% off with promo code VIDEO20. But if you prefer DVDs, that promo code works for you too. Log on to gilberthouse.org/store, use VIDEO20 at checkout, and save 20% on all DVDs. 20% off all streaming video and DVDs with promo code VIDEO20 at gilberthouse.org. Talking the Walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at vftb.net, but the best way to find us is to get our app, the Gilbert House Ministries app, or GHTV, if you will. That gets all of our content right into the palm of your hand, whether it's your mobile device or your tablet, iOS, Android, Amazon, Kindle Fire. This program, our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship, PID Radio, the podcast that started it all, and, of course, our weekly broadcast show, Unraveling Revelation, all of that right in your hand, plus our archives as time allows, going back to 2005 and uploading things from PID Radio and A View from the Bunker, which is now in its 15th year. It's been 14 years that we've been doing this podcast, and so we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to listen. But if you want to make sure that we don't ever get interrupted, that we don't say something that the gatekeepers will use as an excuse to cut us off, if you're watching this on one of the video networks, get our app. And that way it's always there. The Christian company that hosts the content on our app, they show no interest whatsoever in censoring us or telling us what we cannot say. So take advantage of that. You'll find it at gilberthouse.org/app, gilberthouse.org/app. You'll also find a link at vftb.net in the menu bar. Speaking of where to find us on social media, Twitter at View from Bunker or at Derek Gilbert. You'll find us on Facebook, the View from the Bunker page there. And the new social media sites, of course, I've got pages there as well. Truth Social, Gab, MeWe, and Getter at Derek P. Gilbert. This week, as we are recording this, and this is several weeks old by the time you're watching this, but I try to record it the same night that I record the interview so that I'm wearing the same clothing. I know it's a hoodie. I'm 61 years old, kind of age inappropriate, but I figure if it's good enough for Senator Fetterman, those words still don't roll off the tongue. Senator Fetterman, I figure it's okay for me. Anyway, this week we learned that the state of California, through its, what do they call it? The Air Resources Board, or CARB, the California Air Resources Board, unelected bureaucrats voted unanimously to phase out diesel-powered heavy-duty trucks over the next 13 years. So by the year 2036, you cannot buy or apparently operate a heavy-duty truck that is not a zero-emission vehicle, or a ZEV, meaning either electric or it's powered by hydrogen. And, hydrogen, okay, that makes sense. I don't envision things exploding like the Hindenburg on American highways, but it's still a rather new technology. And to force this issue the way the California Air Resources Board is doing is receiving some pushback. Now, this is the first series of rules like this anywhere on Earth. Fleets will need to start making transitions next year, reportedly, but the zero-emission deadlines range from 2035 for last mile and short-haul deliveries, 2039 for things like garbage trucks, 2042 for sleeper cabs and specialty vehicles. So tractor-trailers need to be phased out or converted into zero-emission vehicles somehow by the year 2042. And the CARB's reasons for targeting the heavy-duty sector can be summed up in two numbers. Big trucks comprise only 6% of California's vehicles, but emit 25% of all on-road greenhouse gas emissions. Well, bless their pointy little heads. There is a reason sometimes when a new thing is rolled out. And it's not always that the person or group rolling out this new thing are forward thinkers and the first ones to come up with something that's really great. Sometimes, if you're the first one to put forth an idea, it's because others have considered the idea and decided that it's stupid. This is one of those. There are industry groups that are saying this is really unwise because the infrastructure for repowering, for charging electric vehicles, ZEVs, of this size just does not exist. Remember all of the problem that California's been having with its electric grid in recent years, especially when it gets windy. Rolling blackouts. And now you're going to say over the next 20 years, all of these heavy-duty vehicles will need to be zero emissions, electric or hydrogen. Again, the infrastructure for delivering hydrogen to refuel these vehicles when they're on the road just doesn't exist. Are fleets of vehicles, transportation companies, expected to have two separate types of vehicles? Diesel-powered vehicles that run up to the California border, and then ZEVs that run back and forth inside the state of California only. That is apparently what the California Air Resources Board is mandating here. And industry experts are saying that the odds of this failing spectacularly are very high. Well, bless their pointy little heads. And similarly, the BBC reported, it's getting a 2-for-1 this week. The BBC published a story here just a couple of weeks ago that I've been kind of saving on the brave internet vigilantes who've made it their mission to fight climate change denial on Twitter. But because this information war is so vicious, these people only spoke to the BBC. And by the way, this was written by the BBC's climate disinformation specialist. Yeah, they pay a climate disinformation specialist. They wore masks to hide their identity because us climate deniers are so mean that their lives are literally at risk if they reveal their secret identities. But their mission, they devote their days to finding people posting climate disinformation on Twitter and then debunking it. You know, again, this is the kind of thing it's easy to laugh at or get angry about. But step back and think about these people whose lives are so twisted that they live in constant fear that we humans are in danger of imminent demise from climate change, and that if they don't do something, we're all going to die. And this is their way of contributing in some small way to this noble fight to save humanity by fighting climate disinformation on Twitter. And this fight is so important, and those of us who deny the reality of climate change are so delusional and evil that we might actually cause them harm if they revealed their true identities. Seriously, they belong to a group that they literally call Team Ninja Troll Hunters. What a way to live. What a way to live. And sadly, an entire generation of children now is being raised and brought up out of school with this kind of fear for their lives hanging over their heads. Well, those who have inflicted this worldview upon them, there will be a reckoning someday. Just remember, our Lord has said, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." So in the meanwhile, we just leave these Team Ninja Troll Hunters with these words: bless your pointy little heads. Skywatch TV's virtual conference, One World Rising, which essentially deals with what's happening in the world around us, the creation of the infrastructure for the global government that we see prophesied in Scripture. That is on now. You get instant access for 90 days to the presentations. Tom Horn, Carl Gallups, Ryan Pitterson, Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat, Dr. Mike Spalding, Dr. Igal German, who's been a guest on this program. My presentation, is about the World Economic Forum's Great Reset Initiative and why it should be titled Build Back Babel. Find out more, get instant access for 90 days from the day you sign up. So even though it's already out there now, you still get 90 days access. Sign up at defenderconference.com, defenderconference.com. Now, as you're watching this, let's see, this will be late May by the time this rolls out. So just a couple of weeks from now, as you're watching this, June 9th through 11th of 2023, Sharon and I will be at the Midwest Regional Apostolic Center. This is His Call Ministries. They are hosting us for a weekend that we are going to devote to sharing some information about our research into the geography of spiritual warfare based on our recent trip to Israel. We were blessed to spend a few days there with Pastor Doug and Janelle Van Dorn, visiting some megalithic sites in Israel. And we've got some really, I think, some interesting information that helps explain why Jesus did certain things where he did them. Why was he baptized where he was? Why did he go to Caesarea Philippi? Where is the valley of the shadow of death? I've talked about that on a previous Skywatch TV virtual conference. Anyway, that will be the weekend at His Call Ministries, June 9th through 11th, 2023. That's in Sparta, Missouri. That's just south of Springfield, between Springfield and Branson. You can find out more at hiscallministries.com, hiscallministries.com. Then in July, we'll be in Ohio. We're going back to Brookline, Ohio. That's just outside Dayton for the Go Therefore Conference. Our host, Dr. Mike Spalding. And let's see, I didn't put the note as to who was speaking there, and I would be remiss if I did not share that information with you. The Go Therefore Conference features, I know, L.A. Marzulli, David Heavner, of course, Dr. Mike Spalding, our good friend Pastor Casper McLeod, Kenny C. Let's see, there we go, speaker bios. That gives me all the information. Dr. Michael Lake, coming from our neck of the woods. Coach Dave Daubenmeyer, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. She will be there as well. Thomas Dunn of through the Black Ministries, Dr. Greg Reed, who's been a guest on this program. Want to talk about somebody who knows spiritual warfare firsthand. Greg Reed is the guy. Randy Conway, our good friend David Paxton there as well, and Vicki Joy Anderson, also coming from our neck of the woods here. So quite a good Ozarks connection there. Randy Conway, also from our area, all heading to Ohio that weekend, and we hope we see you there July 28th through 30th and 2023. Information and registration at gothereforeconference.com, gothereforeconference.com. We are leaning towards taking our tour of Turkey and pushing it back to next spring. More definite information coming very soon on that, just because we want to give them a little more time to recover from the devastating earthquake in early February. But we will definitely be next spring in Israel, well, God willing. The dates for our 2024 Israel tour, March 31st through April 9th, with an optional 3-day extension over to Jordan. And our special guest is Timothy Alberino. Join us for a tour of Israel that is like no other. We'll take you to some of these megalithic sites that we talk about, like Gilgal Rephaim, the Serpent Mound of Bashan, and more. And from Mount Nebo in Jordan, we will show you the site of ancient Sodom and the prophesied, at least in our understanding, the prophesied end of the war of Gog and Magog. You can see it from Mount Nebo. And then we'll explain to you why Petra is so spiritually important. A lot of history and a lot of prophecy connected to Petra. More information at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel, gilberthouse.org/travel. And, well, I guess that's it for all the boilerplate stuff. We thank you again for taking time out to listen or watch wherever you may be. If you get a spare moment, you want to give us a thumbs up, a review, or what have you, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, of course, wherever fine podcasts are sold, we certainly would appreciate it. Our announcer is the inimitable D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0. 4.0, mind you. International license. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.